Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I was walking through a bookstore the other day, and I was just scanning the bestsellers, the ones they put right up front.
Hmm.
And I noticed this pattern. It was overwhelming, actually. It felt like every single book was about expansion, how to expand your influence, how to expand your wealth, how to, take up more space in the room.
Sure, the be bigger section.
Exactly. Assertiveness training.
Yeah.
Books with titles like The Art of Not Caring What People Think. It's all designed to make the self bigger, louder, more invincible.
Well, that's the air we breathe, isn't it? The entire modern world is sort of built on this foundation of self-projection. You're not projecting yourself, you feel like you're invisible.
Right. And then, because I guess I enjoy a bit of whiplash, I went home and opened up a sermon from 1738 by Jonathan Edwards. And it felt like he was taking a sledgehammer to that entire bookshelf.
That sounds like Edwards.
We're continuing our series on his famous work, Charity and Its Fruits, which is his big exposition of 1 Corinthians 13. Today, we are looking at the sermon titled, The Spirit of Charity is an Humble Spirit.
And this is really the one where Edwards argues that the Christian life is. It's not about that expansion we see in the bookstore. It's about a kind of contraction. Or maybe a better way to put it is a right-sizing of the self.
A right sizing, I like that. The sermon is based on 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 and 5, specifically the phrase, charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. And I have to say, just looking at the notes for today, this might be the most countercultural topic we've ever tackled. We're talking about humility. And not that fake humility where you're sort of fishing for compliments, oh, this old thing. No, we're talking about the kind of humility that Edwards says is the actual engine of all Christian love.
That's a great way to frame it, because we often think of humility as just a personality quirk. Some people are loud, some are quiet, some are arrogant, some are humble. It's just a temperament.
Yeah, a preference.
But Edwards is going to argue, no, humility is not a temperament. It's a theological necessity. In fact, he's going to make the case that without this specific view of yourself, you literally cannot love God, and you certainly cannot love your neighbor. It's that central.
So we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to look at Edwards' definition of humility, which is surprisingly technical. It's not fuzzy at all.
Not at all.
We're going to discuss a really mind-bending idea he presents, that God cannot be humble. We'll look at why the devil is, in one sense, a very good theologian, but a very bad Christian. And then we're going to get practical and go through a whole checklist of behaviors that humility prevents.
Oh, that checklist is brutal. I'll just warn you now, it's a mirror that most of us will not like looking into.
I can confirm, I certainly didn't. But let's start with the text itself. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. Edwards connects this immediately back to what we talked about in the last deep dive, the subject of envy.
Right, context is everything here. In the verse right before this, Paul says, charity envieth not. Now, envy is a feeling directed at what other people have.
It's an outward look.
It's totally outward. It's looking at your neighbor's new car or their happy marriage or the promotion they just got, and you feel that sourness in your stomach. You want to tear them down because they have something you think you lack.
So envy is looking out.
Correct. But now, Edwards says, Paul just flips the coin. Vaunting, or being puffed up, is about what you have. It's looking inward at your own success, your own money, your own spiritual gifts, and feeling a sense of inflation.
Inflation is a perfect word for puffed up. It really is like a balloon. You're full of hot air.
And Edwards makes this really sharp social observation. He asks, what causes envy? Well, usually it's someone else vaunting themselves. It's a cause and effect. When a rich man walks around acting like he's the king of the world, it directly provokes envy in the poor man. It stirs up strife, it creates tension.
That's interesting. So my pride is actually a stumbling block for you. Well, if I'm arrogant about my blessings, I am actively tempting you to sin against me.
Precisely. You're creating the conditions for envy to flourish. And this is where the spirit of charity, as Edwards calls it, comes in. If love is operating in me, I will not act superior. It just won't happen. And if I don't act superior, it acts as a kind of soothing balm to everyone around me. Edwards argues that humility reconciles people to your high status. He says you can be the richest man in town, you can be the most successful person, and if you are genuinely humble, people won't hate you for it. They might even be glad for you.
Because you're not rubbing their noses in it.
You're not making them feel small to make yourself feel big. That is the core of it. Pride is a zero-sum game. It's competitive. For me to win, you have to lose. Humility is cooperative. It says we're all in this together.
Okay, so if being puffed up is the problem, humility is the solution. But we really need to define our terms here. In the modern world, humility gets confused with all sorts of things like self-hatred, or it's just seen as weakness, being a doormat. How does Edwards define it?
He gives a definition that is incredibly precise. There's no wiggle room. He says humility is a habit of mind and heart corresponding to our comparative unworthiness and vileness before God.
Okay, let's stop right there and just pull that apart. That is dense. A habit of mind and heart.
First part, it's not a one-time decision. You don't just wake up on a Tuesday, decide, today I'm going to be humble, and then you're done. It's a habit. It's a settled disposition, something that becomes part of your character over time.
And mind and heart. Both.
Both. He's very clear on this. It has to start with the intellect, the mind. You have to understand something true about yourself. But that's not enough. It has to move to the will, the heart. You have to not just know that truth, but agree with it, consent to it, even embrace it.
And the truth you're supposed to be embracing is your comparative unworthiness.
That word comparative is the absolute key to this whole sermon. It's the hinge. Edwards is going to argue that you cannot know who you are in a vacuum. You can only know who you are by comparing yourself to something else.
This reminds me of that old idea that a man who's, say, 5'5", might feel tall in a kindergarten class, but he feels very, very short in the NBA. It's all about the comparison point.
That's spot on. Edward says our constant problem is that we usually compare ourselves to each other. I look at you and I think, well, I pray more than he does. I give more money to the church. I'm a pretty good guy. I'm judging myself by the standard of other broken, finite people.
We're all 5'5" guys comparing ourselves to other 5'5" guys.
We are, and we might feel pretty good about it. Edward says true humility only, and I mean only, happens when the comparison point becomes God.
And when you compare yourself to God, the result is unworthiness and vileness.
Those are very strong words, I know, especially vileness. But he's talking about two very specific gaps between us and God. The first gap is the gap of being a creature. That's the unworthiness part. You are finite, God is infinite, you have a beginning, he doesn't.
And the second gap?
The second gap is the gap of being a sinner. That's the vileness part. You are morally dirty, God is perfectly clean. And for Edwards, you have to see both of those gaps to have true humility.
We're going to unpack those two gaps in a minute because he goes into incredible detail there. But before we do, I want to tackle this theological paradox he sets up. I honestly read this section 3 times because I thought I was misreading it. Edwards argues that humility is a virtue that applies to every holy being in the universe, angels, saints, even Jesus Christ. But it does not and cannot apply to God the Father.
It just stops you in your tracks, doesn't it? It's
Yes.
completely counterintuitive. We're trained to think that we should imitate God in all things, be holy as he is holy, be loving as he is loving.
Right, be merciful as he is merciful.
But Edwards says you cannot be humble as he is humble because God is not humble.
Okay, walk us through the logic there, because if humility is a good thing, a virtue, and God is the sum of all good things, how can he possibly lack it?
It goes right back to that definition we just talked about, comparative unworthiness. For God to be humble, he would have to look at something outside of himself and see it as superior. He would have to have a sense that he is small compared to some other higher standard.
But he is the standard. There's nothing higher.
Right. There is no one above him. He is, as Isaiah says, the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity. If God were to act humble in the way we think of it, if he were to say, oh, I'm not that great, or I submit to a higher authority, he would be lying. He would be denying his own nature as the supreme being of the universe.
And God cannot lie.
He cannot. So Edwards concludes that humility is the specific defining virtue that distinguishes the creator from the creature. It's the boundary line. To be a creature is to be humble. To be the creator is to be high. There's no crossover.
So when we try to be proud, when we get puffed up, we're essentially trying to cross that boundary line. We are trying to wear God's clothes.
That is the essence of sin going all the way back to the garden. It's a creature trying to steal the glory and the status that belongs only to the creator. It's cosmic plagiarism. It's trying to be God.
But what about Jesus, though? He is God.
He is God, yes, but he is also man. And this is where the distinction is so important. Edwards points out that in his human nature, Christ is the most humble being who ever lived. He told people he was meek and lowly. He washed his disciples' feet. He submitted to the Father's will, even to the point of death.
So Christ is our model for humility.
He is our model for what a perfect human should be. He shows us how a perfect human relates to God the Father. So he embodies humility in his created human nature while still being God in his divine nature. It's a profound mystery.
That makes sense. So humility is basically just sanity. It's simply acknowledging the reality of your position in the hierarchy of being.
Sanity is the perfect word for it. I think Edwards would love that. Pride is a delusion. It is a genuine break with reality. It's walking around thinking you're a giant when you're actually an ant standing next to a mountain. Humility is simply turning the lights on and seeing things as they really are.
Okay, so let's get into the two ways Edwards says we are mean. Again, for you listening, in 1738, mean didn't mean nasty or cruel. It meant low, common, or small. He breaks this down into natural meanness and moral meanness. Let's start with the natural.
Natural meanness is simply the state of being a created thing. That's it. This applies to you, it applies to me, it applies to the highest archangel in heaven, and it would have applied to Adam and Eve even if they had never eaten the forbidden fruit.
So this is not about sin.
Not yet. This is just about ontology. It's about what you are. It's the infinite distance between something that has a beginning and the being that has no beginning.
He uses that phrase, dust and ashes.
He's pulling that directly from Abraham in Genesis 18. Abraham is interceding for Sodom. He's talking to God, and he says, "Behold now, I've taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, which am but dust and ashes." Abraham isn't confessing a specific sin in that moment. He's confessing his creatureliness.
Right. He's saying, you are spirit, I am dirt. You are eternal, I am fragile. You breathe life into me.
Exactly. It's a staggering thought when you really sit with it. Even the angels in heaven, who in our minds are these terrifying, powerful beings of light, if they stand next to God, they're like a single candle held up against the noon sun. The flame just disappears. It's swallowed up.
So even a perfect, unfallen creature has this natural meanness.
Yes. And Edwards makes the point that we have to feel this natural meanness first.
Why first? Why is the order important?
Because if you don't understand the sheer scale difference between you and God, you will never understand the real problem of your sin. You have to first realize you're dealing with what he calls the fountain of being. If you just think God is a slightly bigger, slightly better version of a human, then your sin doesn't seem like such a big deal.
A minor infraction.
The minor infraction against a local king. But if you realize he is the infinite fire of all existence, then your sin is an absolute catastrophe of cosmic proportions.
Which brings us to the second type, moral meanness. This is where the Reformed doctrine of total depravity comes walking into the room.
It kicks the door down. Natural meanness is just about being small. Moral meanness is about being bad. Edwards says that because of the fall of man, we now have a tenfold meanness. Our natural smallness is compounded by a moral corruption.
He uses these really jarring words like filthiness and pollution. It's not very flattering language.
It's not meant to be. He's a doctor diagnosing a fatal condition. He says that the fall did two things to us. First, it impaired our natural faculties. We became spiritually stupid. We are ignorant of God. We are weak. We are totally dependent on him for our next breath, and yet we act like we're in charge.
So our natural smallness got worse.
It got worse. And second, on top of that, we became morally vile. We turned against the very source of our life. We became rebels. So now, when we stand before God, we are not just small, fragile creatures standing before a big creator. We are guilty, criminal creatures standing before a perfectly holy judge.
He quotes Isaiah 6.5 here, when Isaiah sees God in the temple. Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips.
Note that reaction. Isaiah sees the Lord high and lifted up, and he doesn't say, wow, what a cool light show. He says, I am coming apart at the seams. He is disintegrated by the stark contrast between God's absolute holiness and his own deep-seated corruption.
And he mentions Job, too.
Oh, yes. After Job spends, 30-something chapters questioning God and defending himself, God finally shows up in the whirlwind. And what does Job say? I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes.
I abhor myself. I mean, that is a sentiment you will not find in the self-help aisle at the bookstore.
No, you will not. But for Edwards, it is the only possible path to real joy. Because until you are emptied of that false, puffed-up confidence in yourself, you cannot be filled with God. You have to be brought low before you can be lifted up.
This leads to one of the most fascinating distinctions in the whole sermon. Edwards brings up the devil. And he argues that, in one sense, the devil is very, very aware of his meanness.
This is just a psychological masterclass from Edwards. He asks this question, does Satan know he's smaller than God?
Of course he does.
Of course he does. Satan is not an atheist, and he's certainly not stupid. He knows God's power better than any of us do. He has felt the weight of God's hand casting him out of heaven. He's seen it firsthand.
So in terms of that natural meanness, the devil gets it. He knows he's a creature and God is the creator.
Correct. The Bible says the devils believe and tremble. They have a very clear intellectual grasp of God's infinite greatness and power. But, and this is the absolute pivot point of the whole sermon, they have no humility.
Why not? If they know the truth about their creatureliness, why aren't they humble?
Because they see God's greatness, but they do not see his loveliness. This is crucial for Edwards. The devil looks at God and sees a terrifying judge. He sees a power that can and will crush him. So he shrinks back in fear and terror, but his heart remains as hard as a rock. He hates the power that crushes him.
So terror is not the same thing as humility.
Not even close. Being crushed by a bully makes you resentful and bitter, not humble. True humility, the kind that creates a spirit of charity, requires seeing the beauty of God's holiness. You have to look at God and not just say, he is strong, but he is good, he is desirable, he is excellent in every way.
So when you see that beauty, you don't just bow because you have to, like a prisoner before a king. You bow because you want to. You're captivated.
Exactly. The saint sees God's holiness and says, that is what I was made for, but I am so far from it. It breaks their heart, but it's a sweet breaking. It's a melting of the will. The devil is broken like a rock being smashed with a hammer. The saint is broken like ice melting in the spring sun.
That's a beautiful image. And it explains why legalism, just trying to follow the rules out of fear, never produces real humility. If you're just afraid of God's rules, you might act obedient on the outside, but inside, you're just managing your pride. You aren't killing it.
Right. You're just a scared rebel. You're not a humble child.
Okay, so we have the definition. We have the theology behind it. Now, Edwards moves to the practice. He asks, if a person actually has this sense of their comparative unworthiness, how does it change the way they act in the real world? And he starts with their behavior toward God.
He lists several specific responses, and they all flow from this new self-awareness. The first is confession, and he adds this little qualifier, free confession.
What does he mean by free?
He means you don't have to be dragged to it, kicking and screaming. For a proud person, admitting you're wrong is like pulling teeth. It's painful, they make excuses. Well, I did it, but I wouldn't have done it if you hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
The humble person confesses freely because they already know they're nothing. They're not trying to protect some grand reputation. They're just agreeing with what God already knows to be true about them.
It's like they're just stating the obvious facts of the case. Yes, I'm a sinner. Of course I messed up. What did you expect?
It creates a kind of spiritual lightness. Then he talks about self-distrust. This is the complete opposite of the believe in yourself mantra of our age. Edwards says a humble man knows his own heart is deceitful above all things. He knows his own wisdom is incredibly limited. So he doesn't trust his own hot takes on everything. He's slow to speak.
He's suspicious of his own certainty.
Deeply suspicious, which naturally leads to the next point, reliance. If I can't trust myself, well, I have to trust God. I have to cast myself wholly on him. I have to lean on his wisdom, his strength, and especially his righteousness.
Then he mentions subjection. And this is where the rubber really meets the road for most of us, I think. He talks about subjection to God's laws, which is basic obedience. But then he talks about subjection to God's providence.
And that is the harder test by far. Subjection to providence means accepting the life God has given you, even when it's painful, even when it seems unfair, without charging God with wrongdoing.
This is the Job mindset again, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
It's the ability to suffer without becoming bitter. The proud person in suffering says, I'm a good person. I deserve a good life. Why is this happening to me? The humble person says, I am a sinner saved by grace. Anything short of hell is a mercy I don't deserve.
That sounds incredibly harsh to modern ears.
It is harsh. It's supposed to be. But Edwards would argue it's also the only thing that makes suffering bearable. If you feel entitled to a pain-free life, then every headache, every flat tire, every disappointment is a grave injustice. You are constantly litigating against God in your heart.
Constantly on trial.
Constantly. But if you're humble, you can find a strange contentment even in the valley. You submit to God's sovereignty. You say, you are the king. You do what you will. I trust your character even when I don't understand your plan.
Okay, so that's the vertical aspect, our relationship with God. Now let's shift to the horizontal. Edward spends the bulk of the sermon talking about how this humility toward God totally transforms our behavior toward other people.
Yeah.
He lists 7 specific things that humility prevents. It's like a diagnostic checklist for pride.
And this is where we really see why he calls humility the spirit of charity, because you simply cannot love people well if you're doing any of these 7 things. Pride makes love impossible.
Okay, number 1 on his list. It prevents aspiring or ambitious behavior.
Now, we need to be careful here and add some nuance. Edwards was a Puritan, but he wasn't saying you can't have a job or try to feed your family well. He's not against work. He's talking about that restless, climbing spirit, the spirit that is never content with the station God has allotted to it.
The person who is always looking over the fence thinking the grass is greener.
Or the person who sees other people not as fellow humans, but as rungs on a ladder to their own success. He quotes Jeremiah 45, "Seekest thou great things for thyself? Seek them not. The humble man is not obsessed with getting a bigger title or a bigger house or more followers on social media. He's happy to serve where he is."
It's a death blow to careerism, not to excellence. Christians should always be excellent in their work, but to that desperate, gnawing need to be somebody important.
Right, because if you already know you're a child of the king, you don't need to climb some rickety corporate ladder to find your identity. You already have the highest possible status. Everything else is just a temporary assignment.
Number 2, humility prevents ostentatious behavior.
This is, simply put, showing off. It's the difference between doing a good deed and making absolutely sure everyone knows you did that good deed.
It's the selfie you take while giving money to the homeless person.
It is exactly that. Edward says the humble man is largely indifferent to human applause. He goes right to the Pharisees who prayed on street corners so everyone could see how spiritual they were. Why did they do that? Because they wanted the glory of men. The humble man is content that God sees in secret.
Just think about how much anxiety that one principle removes from your life. If you genuinely do not care if other people clap for you, you're free.
You're completely free from the performance trap. You can just be faithful whether you're on a stage in front of thousands or alone in a closet.
All right, number 3, it prevents arrogant or assuming behavior.
This describes the person who walks into any room and just assumes they're the smartest one there. They take too much upon themselves. They dominate every conversation. They expect everyone to just defer to their opinion as if it's the final word.
Edwards quotes Philippians 2 here. Let each esteem other better than themselves.
And what a radical command that is. Esteem others better. The arrogant man thinks, I should be in charge here. The humble man thinks, I can probably learn something from every single person in this room. It's the death of what we might call main character syndrome. You realize you're a supporting actor in God's great story, and so is your neighbor.
Number 4 on the list, it prevents scornful behavior.
This is a huge one for the internet age. Scorn, contempt, sneering, sarcasm as a weapon. Edwards says this is a primary, unmistakable sign of pride. If you are constantly mocking people, ridiculing their intelligence, or treating them like they're garbage, you are not a humble person. Full stop.
He uses the word condescension here, but he uses it in the old positive way, which is confusing for us.
Yes, we've completely ruined that word. Today, condescending means talking down to someone like they're an idiot. In the 18th century, it meant a superior person voluntarily coming down to the level of an inferior person in order to treat them with kindness and dignity. It's what a good father does when he gets down on his knees to look his toddler in the eye.
It's what God did in the Incarnation.
Precisely. God condescended to become man. Edwards says the humble Christian is willing to condescend to men of low estate. They treat the janitor with the exact same respect and courtesy as the CEO. They don't roll their eyes at people who are less educated or less cultured than them.
Number 5, it prevents willful or stubborn behavior.
This is about being flexible and yieldable. Now, Edwards draws a very important line here. He says the humble man is immovable, inflexible as steel when it comes to the cause of truth and virtue. If God says something is a sin, the humble man doesn't budge an inch. He doesn't compromise God's honor.
But in matters of personal preference or self-interest,
He yields. He gives way. If we're arguing about where to go for lunch, or who gets the credit for a successful project at work, or who has the right of way in traffic, the humble man lets it go. He follows that coat and cloak principle from the Sermon on the Mount.
if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also.
The proud man fights that lawsuit to the bitter end because it's the principle of the thing. The humble man says, it's just a coat, you can have it, my real treasure is in heaven, and you can't touch that. He is a peacemaker, even if it costs her his preferences.
Okay, number 6, it prevents leveling behavior. This one needs some cultural translation because leveling was a specific political movement in Edwards' day.
It was. We have to remember Edwards was not a modern Democrat. He believed in a structured hierarchical society. He believed God ordained different stations, magistrates, kings, fathers, masters. Leveling was the spirit that wanted to tear down all authority and make everyone equal by force.
No, so that burn it all down energy we sometimes see.
Right. Edward says true humility respects the order God has placed in the world. It renders honor to whom honor is due. If someone is your boss, you treat them with respect, not because they are necessarily a better person than you, but because they hold an office ordained by God. You don't try to drag them down out of envy or resentment.
But he flips it for the person in the superior position, too.
He does. It's a two-way street. He says if you are in a high position, humility prevents you from crushing those below you. You don't try to keep people down to protect your own power. In fact, a humble leader should be happy when their subordinates rise and succeed, even if they eventually surpass them.
That's the test, isn't it? Can you genuinely cheer for your subordinate when they get promoted above you?
That is the acid test of humility in leadership. If you can do that with a sincere heart, you have the spirit of Christ. If you resent it, you have the spirit of the world.
Finally, number 7. It prevents self-justifying behavior.
This brings us right back to confession. The proud man cannot bear to be wrong. It's physically painful for him. If you criticize him, he immediately attacks you back. He changes the subject. He brings up your past faults. Well, I wouldn't have yelled if you hadn't done X.
That's blame shifting. It started in the Garden of Eden, the woman you gave me. It's Adam's move.
It is the oldest trick in the fallen human playbook. But the humble man, Edwards says, is easy to entreat. He takes the shame to himself. If you correct a humble person, they actually listen, they weigh it, and if there's even a kernel of truth in it, they accept it with gratitude.
He quotes Psalm 141. Let the righteous smite me, it shall be a kindness, and let him reprove me, it shall be an excellent oil.
Just imagine that. Imagine viewing a sharp rebuke as a kindness. Imagine thinking, thank you for pointing out that spinach in my teeth, instead of, how dare you look at my teeth? That is the freedom of humility. You're not trying to maintain a facade of perfection, so you don't have to panic when someone points out a flaw.
This checklist it's exhausting, really. It shows how far most of us are from this standard. But Edwards moves from diagnosis to application now. He wants us to examine ourselves, and he starts by warning us about counterfeits of humility.
This is very pastoral of him. He knows that some people are just naturally shy or quiet, or maybe they have a melancholy temperament. They're prone to sadness and low moods. He says, do not mistake your depression for Christian humility.
That is a vital distinction. Depression is often a chemical or psychological distortion of reality. It tells you lies, like I am garbage, I am completely worthless. Humility is a clear-eyed vision of reality. It says, I am a sinner, but I am a sinner who is infinitely loved and valued by God. They are not the same thing.
Right, and depression is often very self-focused. You become obsessed with your own failures and your own sadness. True humility is actually self-forgetful. You're so busy looking at God's greatness and beauty that you stop thinking about yourself all the time.
He also warns about Satan's delusions. People who act super spiritual and are always groveling, but they're actually proud of how humble they look.
The holier-than-thou humble person. It's a subtle trap. False piety. The standard, Edwards says, is always the source in the heart. Does your low view of self spring from a genuine sight of God's loveliness? Or is it just a performance to get attention or to manipulate people?
Then he turns and addresses the unregenerate, those who are not Christians. And he does not pull any punches here. He says, if you are not a Christian, you are, by definition, a proud person.
Even if you're the nicest, most polite, most modest grandmother on the planet, if you have not submitted to the gospel of Jesus Christ, you are in a state of high treason against the King of the universe.
Why? What's this connection?
Because the gospel requires you to do the one thing the proud heart cannot stand to do. Admit you can do nothing to save yourself. It requires you to accept charity. It requires you to hold out empty hands and say, I am spiritually bankrupt and I need the perfect righteousness of another. The proud heart hates that. It wants to earn its way. It wants to contribute something.
So to refuse Christ is the ultimate act of arrogance.
It's saying to God, your diagnosis is wrong. I'm not that sick. And your remedy, the cross, is unnecessary. I am good enough on my own. There is no higher pride than that.
And Edwards reminds us that God is literally at war with that spirit.
He uses this terrifying language. He says God sets himself in battle array against the proud. He lines up the artillery. He gives historical examples. Pharaoh, Haman, Herod, all these men who thought they were gods in their own right, and God just flicked them away like flies.
But for the believer, the tone is completely different. Humility isn't a punishment. It's a gateway to joy.
It is the ornament of great price, as Peter says. Edwards argues that humility is the very spirit with which God chooses to dwell. He quotes Isaiah 57:15, "For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, whose name is that is of a contrite and humble spirit."
Just think about that for a second. The God who is too high for the heavens to contain shrinks himself down, in a manner of speaking, to fit inside a humble human heart.
It's the greatest promise in all of Scripture. If you go low, God comes near. If you try to stay high and puffed up, God stays far away. He resists the proud.
And in the end, humility leads to glory. He that humbles himself shall be exalted.
It's the basic physics of the kingdom of God. Down is the only way up.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with that thought we touched on earlier, the one about the demons. It's a haunting thought, really. You can know everything about God, his power, his wrath, his sovereignty, and still be a devil.
You can be the best theologian in the seminary, get a perfect score on your systematic theology exam, and still be totally lost.
Because the missing ingredient isn't more knowledge in your head. It's the sight of beauty. It's that melting of the heart that says, he is not just great, he is lovely.
And that, Edwards would say, only comes from the work of the Holy Spirit. You can't manufacture it. You can't psych yourself up for it. You have to ask for it.
So that's the challenge for all of us this week. Not just to try and act humble by keeping our mouths shut more often, but to actually look at God in his word until we see his beauty. Because once you truly see it, the humility will start to take care of itself.
You won't have to try to be humble. You will just be stunned into it.
Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking. We hope this heavy lifting helps you walk a little lighter this week.
Grace and peace.